In 1927, the United States experienced one of the most catastrophic floods in its history, the Great Mississippi Flood. Torrential rains that began in the summer of 1926 caused the Mississippi River to swell beyond its banks, ultimately breaking through levees in 145 places. The floodwaters engulfed over 27,000 square miles across 10 states, displacing an estimated 640,000 people and destroying thousands of homes and livelihoods. The disaster had a profound impact on the South, particularly affecting agricultural regions and impoverished communities that were already struggling economically. Entire towns were submerged under several feet of water for months, leaving survivors stranded without food, clean water, or shelter. Relief efforts were mounted, but they were often inadequate and poorly organized. Temporary refugee camps sprang up, but conditions were dire, and racial segregation created further hardships for African American communities, many of whom were forced to labor on levees under brutal conditions in exchange for limited aid. The economic toll of the disaster was staggering, with millions of dollars in damages to crops, infrastructure, and homes. The flooding also highlighted the shortcomings of the nation's flood control systems. In response, the federal government passed the Flood Control Act of 1928, leading to the construction of levees, spillways, and reservoirs designed to mitigate future disasters. Beyond its physical and economic devastation, the Great Mississippi Flood reshaped social and political dynamics. It deepened racial and class divisions while sparking debates about federal responsibility in disaster management. The flood's impact also contributed to the Great Migration, as many displaced African Americans moved north in search of better opportunities. Nearly a century later, the legacy of the Great Mississippi Flood remains a somber reminder of nature's power and the need for effective disaster preparedness and equitable recovery efforts. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf Coast, unleashing one of the deadliest and most destructive natural disasters in U.S. history. With winds exceeding 125 miles per hour and an immense storm surge, the hurricane overwhelmed levees and flood walls designed to protect New Orleans, leading to catastrophic flooding across the city. Over 80% of New Orleans was submerged, with water levels reaching up to 15 feet in some neighborhoods. The lower Ninth Ward and other low-income areas were particularly devastated, exposing long-standing issues of inequality and infrastructure neglect. The human toll was staggering. More than 1,800 people lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands were displaced. Many sought refuge in the Superdome and Convention Center, where overcrowding, lack of basic necessities, and slow federal response efforts worsened an already dire situation. Images of stranded residents on rooftops and desperate pleas for rescue dominated media coverage, sparking national and international outrage. Economic losses exceeded $125 billion, with homes, businesses, and public infrastructure severely damaged or destroyed. The cultural heritage of New Orleans also faced significant threats, with historic landmarks and neighborhoods heavily impacted. The hurricane's aftermath highlighted systemic failures in disaster preparedness, communication, and response at multiple levels of government. Controversies over the role of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and local leadership underscored the challenges of managing such a large-scale crisis. Despite the destruction, Katrina marked a turning point in disaster management policies. Investments in levee systems and emergency response capabilities have since been made, though debates about climate change and the vulnerability of coastal cities remain pressing. For survivors, the scars of Katrina persist, both physically and emotionally, as they continue rebuilding lives and communities nearly 2 decades after the storm forever altered New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. In 1889, the small industrial town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, experienced one of the deadliest floods in U.S. history. The disaster began when the South Fork Dam, located 14 miles upstream, gave way after days of heavy rainfall. Built to hold back the waters of Lake Conemaugh, the dam had been poorly maintained and weakened by modifications over the years. When it collapsed, a wall of water, traveling at an estimated 40 miles per hour, rushed down the narrow Conemaugh Valley, obliterating everything in its path. The flood reached Johnstown in less than an hour, unleashing a wave of destruction. Entire buildings, bridges, and railcars were swept away, creating a massive pile of debris that trapped people and crushed homes. Over 2,200 lives were lost, making it the deadliest flood in U.S. history at the time. The torrent of water carried wreckage, livestock, and people for miles, leaving a landscape of ruin and heartbreak in its wake. In addition to the immediate devastation, fires erupted when the debris at the stone bridge caught fire, killing dozens who were trapped. Disease and hardship followed the flood, as survivors faced contaminated water, food shortages, and poor sanitation. Relief efforts were led by the American Red Cross, marking the first major peacetime disaster response for the organization under Clara Barton's leadership. The Johnstown flood sparked widespread outrage, particularly toward the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, whose wealthy members own the dam and lake. Although legal attempts to hold the club accountable failed, the disaster underscored the dangers of neglecting infrastructure for private interests. Today, the event remains a sobering reminder of how human negligence and natural forces can converge to create catastrophic outcomes, while the resilience of survivors stands as a testament to human strength in the face of tragedy. In 1889, the small industrial town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, experienced one of the deadliest floods in U.S. history. The disaster began when the South Fork Dam, located 14 miles upstream, gave way after days of heavy rainfall. Built to hold back the waters of Lake Conemaugh, the dam had been poorly maintained and weakened by modifications over the years. When it collapsed, a wall of water, traveling at an estimated 40 miles per hour, rushed down the narrow Conemaugh Valley, obliterating everything in its path. The flood reached Johnstown in less than an hour, unleashing a wave of destruction. Entire buildings, bridges, and railcars were swept away, creating a massive pile of debris that trapped people and crushed homes. Over 2,200 lives were lost, making it the deadliest flood in U.S. history at the time. The torrent of water carried wreckage, livestock, and people for miles, leaving a landscape of ruin and heartbreak in its wake. In addition to the immediate devastation, fires erupted when the debris at the stone bridge caught fire, killing dozens who were trapped. Disease and hardship followed the flood, as survivors faced contaminated water, food shortages, and poor sanitation. Relief efforts were led by the American Red Cross, marking the first major peacetime disaster response for the organization under Clara Barton's leadership. The Johnstown flood sparked widespread outrage, particularly toward the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, whose wealthy members own the dam and lake. Although legal attempts to hold the club accountable failed, the disaster underscored the dangers of neglecting infrastructure for private interests. Today, the event remains a sobering reminder of how human negligence and natural forces can converge to create catastrophic outcomes, while the resilience of survivors stands as a testament to human strength in the face of tragedy. In October 2012, Superstorm Sandy devastated the northeastern United States, becoming one of the most destructive and costly storms in the nation's history. While it began as a hurricane, Sandy transitioned into a massive post-tropical cyclone, bringing an unprecedented combination of storm surge, high winds, and torrential rainfall. The storm impacted 24 states, with New York and New Jersey bearing the brunt of the destruction. The storm surge caused catastrophic flooding in densely populated coastal areas. In New York City, seawater poured into lower Manhattan, inundating streets, subway tunnels, and electrical systems. The surge reached record levels, with waves over 14 feet crashing into the city. Entire neighborhoods, such as Breezy Point in Queens, were submerged or destroyed, and fires broke out, compounding the devastation. In New Jersey, iconic boardwalks were ripped apart, and coastal towns like Seaside Heights and Hoboken faced widespread flooding and destruction. Over 8 million people were left without power, some for weeks, as Sandy's winds brought down power lines and damaged infrastructure. The economic toll was staggering, with damages exceeding $70 billion. Homes and businesses were destroyed, and thousands of families were displaced. Transportation systems were paralyzed, halting commutes and emergency response efforts. Sandy also underscored the vulnerabilities of urban areas to climate change and rising sea levels. The storm prompted serious discussions about infrastructure resilience, leading to initiatives like seawalls, storm surge barriers, and improved building codes in affected areas. Federal, state, and local governments invested in recovery and mitigation, but the recovery process for many individuals and communities was slow and arduous. The human impact of Superstorm Sandy remains its most enduring legacy. It reshaped the lives of countless residents and highlighted the urgent need for proactive measures to protect coastal regions from future storms. In early 2023, California faced relentless storms driven by atmospheric rivers, causing widespread flooding across the state. Atmospheric rivers are narrow corridors of concentrated moisture in the atmosphere, often called rivers in the sky, capable of delivering immense amounts of rain and snow in short periods. Over weeks, a series of these storms battered the state, overwhelming its aging infrastructure and leaving many areas underwater. Urban centers, including San Francisco and Sacramento, experienced flooded streets and neighborhoods as stormwater systems failed to handle the deluge. In rural areas, farmland was submerged, with fields transformed into temporary lakes, jeopardizing crops and the livelihoods of farmers. Small towns and low-lying regions faced evacuation orders as rivers, such as the Merced and Salinas, overflowed their banks, threatening lives and homes. The economic toll was substantial, with damages estimated in the billions. Roads and highways were washed out, disrupting transportation and isolating communities. Landslides triggered by the persistent rain caused additional destruction, burying homes and infrastructure under tons of mud and debris. In mountain regions, heavy snowfall melted rapidly due to the warm rain, adding to the flooding downstream and creating dangerous conditions for residents. The disaster highlighted the challenges posed by climate change, as extreme weather events become more frequent and intense. California's experience underscored the urgent need for modernized flood management systems, such as enhanced levees, reservoirs, and wetlands restoration to absorb excess water. State and federal agencies mobilized to provide relief, but the scale of the disaster overwhelmed resources, leaving some residents waiting days for assistance. For many Californians, the 2023 atmospheric river storms were a grim reminder of nature's unpredictability and the growing importance of preparing for a future marked by more extreme and erratic weather patterns. Recovery efforts continue as communities rebuild and adapt. In May 2015, Texas experienced one of its most intense and deadly flash flooding events in recent history, triggered by torrential rains that overwhelmed rivers, creeks, and urban drainage systems. The Blanco River, which flows through Wimberley and San Marcos, rose to historic levels after more than a foot of rain fell in a matter of hours. The river surged from a typical depth of 5 feet to over 40 feet, sweeping away homes, vehicles, and bridges with little warning. Entire neighborhoods were devastated as floodwaters tore through central Texas. Families were caught off guard, with some climbing to rooftops or trees, to escape the rapidly rising water. Tragically, dozens of lives were lost, and many more were injured or displaced. In Wimberley, a vacation home was ripped from its foundation and carried downstream, killing members of a family who were staying there for the holiday weekend. The scenes of destruction left behind by the flood were heartbreaking, with debris scattered for miles and entire communities left in ruins. Urban areas like Houston also suffered significant flooding, as overwhelmed drainage systems led to water inundating roads, homes, and businesses. Thousands of vehicles were abandoned on submerged highways, and emergency responders worked tirelessly to rescue stranded residents. The economic impact was severe, with damages running into the billions and countless families facing long-term recovery. The 2015 Texas floods underscored the dangers of flash flooding, particularly in regions where urban sprawl and development have reduced natural drainage capacity. The disaster prompted discussions about improving flood forecasting, early warning systems, and infrastructure resilience. For those affected, the floods were a sobering reminder of the speed and power of nature, as well as the importance of preparedness and community support in the face of such sudden and devastating events. Flood disasters throughout U.S. history have left lasting scars on communities, while highlighting the need for better preparedness, infrastructure, and resilience. Each event, from the Great Mississippi Flood to Hurricane Katrina and beyond, has taught valuable lessons about managing the risks of flooding and responding to its devastating consequences. One of the most significant takeaways is the importance of investing in resilient infrastructure. Levee failures and disasters, like the 1927 Mississippi Flood and Hurricane Katrina, underscored the need for robust flood control systems. Advances in technology have since led to the construction of more durable levees, flood barriers, and stormwater management systems. However, many regions remain vulnerable due to aging infrastructure and insufficient funding for upgrades. Flood disasters have also spurred improvements in emergency response and early warning systems. Modern weather forecasting and real-time monitoring have significantly enhanced the ability to predict flooding events and issue timely evacuation orders. Communities now rely on advanced flood modeling and mobile alerts, which can save lives by providing crucial information in critical moments. Environmental approaches, such as restoring wetlands and preserving floodplains, have emerged as essential components of flood management. These natural buffers can absorb excess water and reduce the severity of flooding, complementing man-made defenses. Federal programs, including FEMA's buyout initiatives, have encouraged relocation from high-risk areas to reduce long-term vulnerability. Yet, challenges remain. Climate change continues to amplify the frequency and intensity of flooding, putting additional pressure on governments and communities to adapt. Rising sea levels and extreme rainfall events demand a coordinated response, combining infrastructure improvements, policy changes, and public awareness campaigns. The future of flood preparedness depends on learning from past disasters, prioritizing sustainable solutions, and fostering resilience. With proactive measures, communities can better protect lives, livelihoods, and the environment against the growing threat of floods.